Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the Kings Lynn and West Norfolk series based around Kings Lynn, Hunstanton and Downham Market. There's 101 of them in this one. Time to go walking. Welcome back to Kings Lynn and West Norfolk, everybody. Now, do you remember in the last episode, Home Next to Sea, I said we'd be seeing the sea a bit more in this episode? Well, that's what I thought, but then I was faced with this to start this episode off. As you can see, the sea is visible, it's in the very far distance, but between the sea and where I'm stood, there's a load of creeks, because this is an old harbour, and this is where we're going to begin the parish of Thornham. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Here's another pretty little village on the North Norfolk coast. This is Thornham, which lies about 4 miles east of Hunstanton, situated within the Norfolk coast area of outstanding natural beauty. Like its neighbours, the village is separated from the sea by atmospheric marshes. Thornham is an attractive year-round venue, popular with walkers, photographers, artists, birdwatchers and cyclists, who are attracted here by the peace and tranquillity of this part of Norfolk. Thornham is connected to the sea by way of a harbour, which has links to smuggling and to oyster farming too. The village has 3 pubs, the Lifeboat Inn, the Chequers and the Orange Tree, and it's here you'll come across the fabulous Thornham Deli with its retail and food outlet. It's a popular place for many reasons, and it's also an historic place as well. The village's history dates back to the Romans and the Anglo-Saxons. Smuggling was a major occupation in the 1780s, but by the 1900s, ironworking was the local trade. Thornham's ironworks were very prosperous, so much so that the village sign depicts a pair of iron workers. The church has had a checkered past by all accounts, and must break some kind of record for how long it took to build, thanks in part to the Great Fire of London. Now, why would a church in Norfolk have been affected by that, you ask? Anyway, if all of that's not interesting, I don't know what is. Let's walk. We begin this one at Thornham Harbour, right on the North Sea coast. It forms the eastern end of Home Dunes Nature Reserve, which we saw last week. You can find it at the far northern end of Staithe Lane. A natural harbour, this has more than a few bits of questionable history. In the 18th and 19th centuries, it was a popular place with smugglers who used to sink their contraband off the coast in waterproof containers. Then, when the tide had receded, the locals would recover the goods. The area is used nowadays for leisure sailing and for coastal fishing. Oysters are grown in the natural salt marsh creeks that meander from the North Sea into the harbour. When the oysters reach maturity, they're hand-picked and brought ashore for cleaning and grading before being purified by UV treatment. The salt marsh creeks here have provided this bountiful delicacy since Roman times, and I quite like oysters too. Just Just goes to show, doesn't it? A place doesn't need to be mega expensive and mega historic for it to be worth coming to. Thornham Harbour is a piece of tranquility here on the Norfolk coast, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And with the weather like it is this morning, not a cloud in the, well, there are some clouds in the sky, but not many that you can see on the camera. And just the sound of seagulls and other birds making their way across this fantastic little nature reserve around the harbour. It's absolutely amazing. Love it. Love it. Norfolk is absolutely brilliant. I can't think of any other words really to describe it, quite frankly. Anyway, that's the harbour. So what about the village itself? Well, I've got a suspicion this one's going to be quite difficult to walk around because the route I've planned seems to be quite lengthy for quite a small village. Let's go and check it out. Our route begins at one of Thornham's 3 pubs. This is the Chequers, a 16th century pub that's also a modern 11-bedroom hotel named Thornham Rooms. It's popular with birdwatchers because of Thornham's close proximity to home dunes and to Titchwell Marsh. Not long after the pub, you come to a small green. This is where we find the village sign. It depicts ironworking, a major part of Thornham history, as the village had an ironworks between 1887 and 1920. The local History Society held an exhibition about them at the church in 2014 as part of a General Heritage Day. Further exhibitions have also taken place. Now we're on Hall Lane and you're looking at Thornham Hall. This was built in about 1780 for George Hogg, who was a wealthy merchant from King's Lynn. Made of red brick, the interior of the house contains marble fireplaces and original plaster friezes depicting classical scenes. Sometimes properties can give you a clue as to what used to be in a place. If you look here at the end of Hall Lane, there's a house behind these gates. Now this is called Stocks Hill House, and if you look on this nameplate over here, you can even see there is a set of stocks. So I imagine that in times past they were here on the village green. Right opposite the small green is an old Methodist church. It was built in 1870, but I couldn't pin down a date of closure. It's now a house. Next door is Thornham's Anglican church, dedicated to All Saints. This was left unfinished for centuries. Building came to an abrupt stop in 1348, thanks to the Black Death, and its tower was abandoned by Masons in 1666, when they left to rebuild London following the Great Fire. It was finally completed in 1935 to commemorate King George V's Silver Jubilee. There's a couple of commemorations on the Lickgate too. These concern the last merchant to use Thornham Harbour, Nathaniel Woods, and also his ship, the Jessie Mary, who entered it after her last voyage in 1914. Speaking of ships, the bell of HMS Thornham, a Ham-class minesweeper which was named after the village, hangs inside All Saints Church as well. This church was open, so let's go in and have a look. Okay, church is open, so let's go in. Now I wonder if it's just this little door we open. Yes it is. Now we've seen this before, haven't we? We open the little door, which is part of a bigger door. Have to be a leprechaun to get into this one. Please mind the step. You don't say. Okay, here we are inside the church. So, well, the first thing you notice about this place is how light it is. We all know why that is now, don't we? No stained glass. So, shan't be a dark video, this one in here. It's also really echoey, isn't it? That's because it's quite big. It's quite tall. It's sort of, if you look up, you see how big it is. You stand outside, it looks big from outside, but as soon as you get in, it kind of belies its size, doesn't it? Right, let's have a look around. Let's head into the chancel. And, wow, big chancel. huge. Not much on the walls. There's a couple of tablets here and there. There's a couple there. There's one on this wall here. Let's see what this one's about. This is in memory of Lionel Neville Frederick Ames Lyde, late captain of the Grenadier Guards. Died in 1883. Them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. That's a saying I've not heard before. But let's have a look at the other walls. That wall's pretty much blank. But there's one or two on this wall here. So let's have a look. So this one is to the memory of Elizabeth, the wife of Henry Benton and daughter of John Carter, merchant in Brancaster. There's some slabs on the floor, look here. There'll be tombs under our feet. This one looks like a war memorial. Yes, it is. As you can see, there's a poppy wreath there. And there is the war memorial for World War One. And that one underneath is for World War Two. Little wooden one underneath the marble tablet. And at the back of the church here, as well as the font, which you can see there, there's also an English flag flying above that door. And just before we come out of the church again, look at this. There's a model post mill, and there's a bit of information about this above it. So let's have a look. This is the Thornham Windmill. The original mill was a post mill standing on high ground to the south of the village. At some time it was moved to a site near the harbour. The post was not re-erected, but instead the body was mounted on a short brick tower on which it could turn to face the wind by the action of a fan carriage. So it became a composite mill, of which very few examples are known. The fan carriage and the patent sails on the mill, when it ceased to work, were inventions of the 18th century, but both were probably modernisations to an older mill, for the wooden wind shaft suggests an earlier date. Does that sentence make sense? Not sure. The dimensions of the model, to a scale of 1 inch equals 1 foot, were calculated from the brick-based tower, which is still standing. From the wooden wind shaft and iron Y-wheel exhibited at Gresson Hall Rural Life Museum, and from a number of photographs taken when the mill was standing. The model was made and presented to Thornham by Mr. Kenneth Hamlin of Heacham. And Heacham, by the way, is on the other side of Hunstanton, just so you know. That's one that's coming very soon in the Kings Lynn and West Norfolk series. Looks quite good, that, doesn't it? Really good, really good. And I believe it stood, that looks like a millstone, a small one. Brilliant. Nice church, nice find in there. Very echoey, as I said, but well worth a visit if you're ever in Thornham. And why wouldn't you be? Because it's a beautiful place. Speaking of which, let's head back out the door and see what else we can find here. Church Street has more than a few historic buildings. Here's an old bakery for starters, but this pales in comparison to its next door neighbour. Behind these gates is Thornham Manor, an enormous property which dates back to 1674. The house was restored in 1910 and it's currently worth well over £1 million. Within its grounds is a building called the Stables, a brick and flint stable conversion which is used as a private holiday home throughout the year. After the manor, the road reaches a fork. If you go to the left, which we're about to do in a moment, you're heading back towards the harbour. In fact, the harbour can be seen from this corner. If you peer over this small hedge and look across the field beyond, you can just make out the top of the harbour shed and see the sea too. In the other direction is the green, and that'll be covered using the car at the end of this video. Okay, now the road turns left and it starts to become a little less built up. This is the road I drove in on from the harbour earlier. You would have seen that in the drive-in section right at the beginning of this video. Now, so it's worth walking up here because even though there aren't many properties, and they're all generally speaking on the left-hand side of the road, there is a pub up here. And it's always worth finding a pub, isn't it? Skip Lane now, and this gated community was interesting. This is St George's Court, a collection of 17 brand new homes, each with its own style and character. They're designed in a traditional Norfolk style, but are still able to offer a sense of modern luxury thanks to their beautiful surroundings. These won't be cheap. Then we come to the Lifeboat Inn, which is easily the most historic of Thornham's 3 pubs. Termed a classic inn, history is soaked into the very timbers of this building. It used to be used by those devious little smugglers we mentioned earlier at the harbour, as it was here they would dish out their ill-gotten gains. The pub has served guests for generations, who have all enjoyed the view it offers over the fields and the beautifully unspoilt expanses of salt marshes beyond. I would imagine it's still busy, especially in the summer months, because behind it there's this caravan park. All of this is just a short stroll from Thornham Harbour. And what that little walk has done is it's brought us to the road that you use to get to Thornham Harbour. It's behind me, and I don't know whether you can see, there's a sign just there that says tidal flooding. So I imagine at times Thornham Harbour is inaccessible because when the tide comes in it may well swamp the road, so you may not be able to get to it at all times. But there you go, that's the road you use to access Thornham Harbour. We are going the other way, this way, and back to the main road and towards the playing field. No entry, says this sign, but don't be alarmed, we can go in. It's just a one-way system for the car park at Thornham Village Hall. The Village Hall was finally opened in 2013 after years of fundraising and generous grants from the National Lottery, the Borough Council and Norfolk County Council. It's a well-used building and features a playground outside it next to a large playing field. Its car park is controlled by a pay and display system, but parking here is free for the first hour and a quarter. That brings us to Thornham Deli, which by its own admission is more than just a deli. It showcases the very best of local produce and offers homemade food. Its cafe has a south-facing sun dining area and outside seating. Twitchers like this place too because it has a collection of rare birds as well. Over the road you'll find Thornham Cottages, holiday lets which work in conjunction with the deli. Stay here and you'll receive a discount voucher for it. Okay, and so from here it's just a walk straight back to the centre of the village where the church is. There's a few more landmarks to catch along the way and then we'll be done with the main walk. I do have a little driving section as well for you at the end of this video, so stick around for that. Although Thornham has no shops other than the deli, you can buy odds and ends off the locals. This house here, for example, has some kindling for sale. Over the road is Anna's house, another dog-friendly B&B. Now, I've no idea who Anna is or was, but you can also follow Anna's walk from here too, according to a small plaque on its outer garden wall. This house is Copper Hall. Not sure how it gets its name, but trust me, it's nothing to do with the local plot. Eventually, we reach the third pub. This is the Orange Tree, and it used to be called the King's Head Hotel. There's no smugglers here. This one is a contemporary dining pub. Walkers who use the Pedder's Way often drop in. On the small piece of grass between the pub and the church is a red phone box, which still has its phone. And lastly, we have a bus stop. Once again, Thornham is another village to be served by the number 36 coastliner from King's Lynn to Fakenham. And where better than the centre of the village to have your parish notice board? One of the TVI cards is going on this board right here next to the bus stop. Here we go. That is Thornham officially in the books. Now then, just before we leave this one behind, I do have a driving section that I want to do, but I'm going to show you first where that driving section is going to be. So we are here, right there, centre of the village really. I've walked around here. My starting point was actually here outside this pub, so I've just got to walk back up there. The hall is down here. Now this eastern end of Thornham, as you can see, is a lot more spaced out. It's much more sparsely populated, so I'm going to drive up here turn left at this corner, and then come around back to where we are here to finish off. Don't think there's much out there, but if there is, the car will catch it. As I sort of suspected, this area we're about to drive around doesn't have a lot, but rather than just cut this footage from the video, I figured this would come in handy as a backdrop for a few other important historical bits I haven't yet spoken about. Firstly, a bit more about the ironworks. They were set up by the Lady of the Manor at the end of the 19th century, and they became famous after completing pieces for the Prince of Wales at nearby Sandringham. World War I saw most of the workforce leave for the trenches, and the factory closed in 1920. Speaking of war, Thornham Marsh was used between 1914 and 1918 by the Royal Flying Corps as a practice bombing range, and there was a military hospital on nearby Titchwell Marsh. The RAF would return to Thornham between 1950 and 1959 when bombing practice was supervised from a control tower, which has since been demolished. At low tide, the remains of tanks are sometimes exposed. Violent goings-on have always been a thing on this coastline, going back to the days of the smugglers. In 1782, the Battle of Thornham was fought between the smuggling barons and the Superintendent of Excise. This was described by Neil Holmes in his excellent book, The Lawless Coast: Murder, Smuggling and Anarchy in the 1780s on the North Norfolk Coast. I've yet to mention Thornham Beach either. It's the most remote beach in Norfolk, covered with a fine soft sand and a few small areas of shingle. Beware though, as it's tidal, sandbanks are often known to form there. Even so, it's ideal if you like your solitude. One last thing, Thornham has a school, which still stands. We've actually already driven past it, but the camera didn't pick it up. Luckily, we're going to get to see it again at the end of this video. It's a mid-19th century Gothic effort, built in knapped flint with stone dressings. It's even got a bellcote and a spire too. So such was the nature of that little bit of driving that I had to drive past this again anyway, so I've opted just to stop and have a look at it a bit more closely. I don't think the camera caught it, so there it is. Let's head across to it, and you can see that is quite the building, isn't it just? That's a nice way to end actually, the parish of Thornham, with a very historic building in a village that's also very historic, isn't it? For various reasons. You've got the harbour, you've got the church, you've got that now, and you've also got the mill as well. Let's not forget the mill. All sorts here in the parish of Thornham on the beautiful North Norfolk coast. Another one down in King's Lynn and West Norfolk. And it's time for me to move on to my next one. And I haven't got to go very far. It's literally just a little bit further along this road. And it's a very small one I'm going to next, so it'll be a nice quick episode. This has been the parish of Thornham, and I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.